Welcome back to Smoked Barbecue Source. I'm Ricer, and today I'm doing a review on the brand new Traeger Woodridge. Now I have the base model, but there's also the Pro and the Elite. The Woodridge and the Pro are available during this launch. The Elite, will see that maybe around late March or early April of 2025. But for today, we're just gonna talk about the standard Woodridge. When it comes to packaging, Traeger still is one of my favorite to unbox. Something new that Traeger is doing on their packaging is that they're labeling the boxes with a certain type of animal for the step of the assembly that you're going to have to do, which makes the assembly process a breeze. And for all of you with little kids, you still get to make a fort out of the Woodridge box. The assembly on the Woodridge was super easy. Now there is a few more pieces to put together on the assembly compared to some of the newer Traeger models. So you might have to ask a friend or your wife to help you out to put it together. But it was still very streamlined, and that is because of that new fancy labeling. So ultimately, it still only took the boys a little over an hour to put this pit together. And for all of you techies out there, they even have a step-by-step animated version that you can watch right on your phone while you're putting it together. There's only one thing that the boys got a little confused about during the assembly, and that's the bottom brace. Just make sure that you're looking at the guide or the animated step and have all those pieces lined up correctly. Now you can take the cord and plug it in behind the auger, and there is a little orange switch that you're gonna have to turn on. But before we actually fire this pit up, I wanna get the Wi-Fi set up first, because I know that a lot of these pits, well, they maybe have been in storage or on the shelf for 3 months to maybe a year. And sure enough, after I got the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi set up, the Woodridge told me that it needed to do an update. Now on every single new pellet grill out there, you have to do what I like to call a burn off. And that's just basically just burning off any of the debris or the oil from the manufacturing process. I typically never wipe off any of the oil on the drip pan. I actually use that, and think of it kind of like that I'm seasoning up a cast iron pan. This helps it from rusting, and it also adds a little bit of layer, so when it comes to cleaning it up, it scrapes off easier. Now we've just fill up that 24-pound hopper and crank it up to 350 degrees. And then just hold down that ignite button until you see that display turn orange. It'll take about 20 minutes to get up to that temp, but once you've reached 350 degrees, set a 15-minute timer. After that timer goes off, crank it up to 500 degrees and run it for another 45 minutes. Once that timer is done, then you just hit the shutdown, and it's gonna take about 25 minutes for this pit to cool down. Now you can get to cooking. Now let's talk a little bit about the creature comforts on this pit. We have 860 square inches of cooking space on the Woodridge, giving us 520 on the bottom rack and 340 on the top rack. And I'm actually pretty impressed with that upper rack, because you can get a lot of food up there. Like all of the new Traeger models, we have the pop and lock system, so you can add accessories wherever you want. So if you don't want your little spice tray over by the hopper, well, you can put it over on this end instead. We have a new Bluetooth and Wi-Fi controller, and it is very easy to read. You have 2 probe ports, but they only send you 1 probe. Now, if you're looking for wireless probes, Traeger does have one that you can purchase that'll hook up to the Woodridge too. And like most pellet grills, you do have a pellet dump if you decide to store it or you just want to change out the flavor. And like the Timberline and the Ironwood, we have the Easy Clean Grease and Ash Keg, which makes it really easy to clean up in between cooks. I really like that they put some hooks around this whole pit so you can hold your racks and even your drip pan when you're doing that deep cleaning after every 3 or 4 cooks. This way you don't have to lay any of your cooking components on the ground or on your deck. They just hang from the pit, so it makes it pretty convenient. On the standard Woodridge, we have 2 wagon wheels and 2 peg legs. And honestly, this pit is pretty heavy, so it's not that easy to move around. But being heavy is a good thing, because this pit is pretty solid. So if you plan to store this pit after every cook, I suggest that you probably look at the Pro, because that does have the wagon wheels and 2 rotating and locking casters. Now when it comes to cooking on the Woodridge, it did a decent job. I did a quick temperature test using my RFX gateway to see if we had any temperature differences from left to right. And what I came up with, it runs about 20 degrees hotter on the right-hand side. Now if you've ever owned a pellet grill, the first thing that you notice when you fire up the Woodridge, it is super quiet. I can't even hear it run when I have my exhaust system on. But during the first rib cook, I did not see a tremendous amount of smoke. I ran these ribs at 275 degrees and they cooked good, but when I did the taste test, I did notice that they were lacking a tad of smoke flavor. But again, this was the first cook, so I really couldn't form an opinion yet. On my second cook, I did some big old beefers. That's my favorite barbecue. So I figured we're gonna put the Woodridge to test. I ran these beef ribs at 250 degrees, figuring that maybe I could get a little bit more smoke flavor. Again, on this second cook, I didn't see a lot of smoke bellowing out of that down and out exhaust system. But these beefers did cook at the same pace that I'm accustomed to on other pits. These turned out incredibly juicy with a really nice bark. And I did taste a tad more smoke flavor, but it might be because they ran for about 8.5 hours. I also noticed that it ran very efficiently. I filled up that hopper to max and I still had plenty of pellets after the cook. The next barbecue style test that I did an overnight brisket cook. I ran the pit at 200 degrees until I reached a really nice looking bark. Then I just simply threw it in a pan and ran it till it was tender. The bonus was that I had some extra beef trimmings in the freezer, so it was a perfect time to make up some beef tallow. This brisket also turned out really nice and juicy and tender, with a pretty dang good looking smoke ring. So I'm starting to lean towards that the Woodridge is very similar to the Pro 780. Whenever I ran that pit at 250 degrees or higher, it never had the same smoke profile as when I did at a lower temp. After the burn-off and these 3 low and slow cooks, it is a great time to pull some maintenance. I mean, I had at least 24 hours of total cook time on this pit. The cleanup process is just like every single other pellet grill. Clean up the grates, take them out, scrape down the drip pan, and then vacuum out the inside. You also want to check the grease and ash keg to see how much grease is in there. But I really was a tad surprised at how much ash was around that fire pot that didn't make it to the grease keg. Now the last thing I did was I wanted to test this pit out to see how it would do grilling. So to make it simple, I just did some thick patty cheeseburgers. Because when they're thick, they're gonna get a tad more smoky flavor. And I figured this was a great time to test and see how long it would take for the Woodridge to get up to 500 degrees. And the cook time was only about 20 minutes to get these burgers to a medium to medium well doneness. This way you still get a tad of pink in the center with a good solid bite. Now I certainly didn't get a good char on these burgers, but it did have a really nice smoky flavor. And a pro tip, always scrape down that melted cheese while the pit is cooling down. The next thing I did was some good old-fashioned ribeyes, and I figured this was a great time to test Traeger's version of a grill grate. All I did was spray them down with a little bit of Pam and let them preheat until the Woodridge reached 500 degrees. When I did that first flip, I gotta be honest, I was really disappointed that I didn't have any sear. So I took out my IR gun and checked it, and sure enough, those grates were below 300 degrees. Now the steaks turned out with a really nice medium rare, but they had 0 for char. So at this time, I cannot stand behind Traeger's version of the grill grate yet. On my last test, well, it was Christmas, so it was a perfect time to cook up a prime rib and some lobster tails. Once I reached an internal temperature of 115 degrees, I cranked the Woodridge up to 500, and now it's time to see if we can add a little bit of sear and grill up them lobster tails. I was able to get a little bit of sear on it, and you can see we have a really nice wall-to-wall medium rare. But when it came to the lobster tails, they took a little bit longer than what I'm accustomed to. They still had a really good buttery, smoky flavor, but they were a tad tough. It just simply took too long to get an internal temperature of 145 degrees. Now here's the part that you've all been waiting for. What is my opinion on the Traeger Woodridge? Number one, I really like the new sleek design with the bigger footprint in the cooking chamber. I really like the new style controller. It's really simple to read with those big numbers. Of course, I like the PAL or the pop and lock lock system along with the new grease and ash keg. And the last thing, I love how quiet it is and how efficient it runs. Some of the things that I don't like is that on the standard Woodridge, you don't have any rotating or locking casters. And I also don't like that it doesn't have the super smoke mode. The Pro and the Elite does, but not on the standard Woodridge. And that goes along with my third point, that it doesn't have the same amount of smoke flavor that I can produce off the Ironwood and the Timberline. Now the price point on the standard Woodridge is $799, which is a lot better than purchasing either the Ironwood or the Timberline. Now overall, I do really like the Woodridge, but if I was in the market to purchase one, I would be leaning towards the Pro. The tad bigger size, along with the super smoke and the bottom storage shelf, would justify me to pay a tad more. If you're looking for a more in-depth review or pricing on the Traeger Woodridge, check the description below. But I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.